in whiskey, like the losses from the barrels, the evaporation is kind of crazy. Can you explain that? Because I read some statistics on that, but they are pretty shocking.
Yeah, so evaporation during maturation, that's what's called the angel share, right? Because
Yeah.
when you fill up a barrel and you empty the barrel, a certain percent of it is going to be missing, and that has just gone to the angels. You'll never see that back. So that's kind of the industry term. And it is going to vary dramatically based on the location where it was matured. For instance, in Scotland, Scotland is a fairly cool, fairly damp location. I mean, regardless of which region in Scotland we're talking about, they can mature their whiskey in these dunnage warehouses. And, over a couple decades, maybe only lose 8 to 10% of that whiskey to the angel share, which
Wow.
is incredible. In the United States, we have all these different microclimates, right? If you age a bourbon in Texas for 6 years, you might lose 40% of that barrel to just evaporation.
Wow.
Which is crazy. That's really weird to think about. And it creates a problem for the consumer because the American consumer, at least, I'd say probably the global consumer, is really trained to pay attention to age. And that's not great. There's good things and bad things about age, but a 20-year product aged in a cold location versus a 6-year product aged in a hot location, it's not really fair to look at the age, because what you need to look at is the flavor profile, the esterification of it all, the mature flavor notes that have been developed through the aging process. So it gets very complicated, but the percentages are going to vary much by different region. In place like Iowa, what we lose is about 20%, and that's our average. Specifically in bourbon, we will lose between 20 to 22%. You have to keep in mind that we're going to lose the most during the first year because we're going to fill up a brand new barrel and the liquid is going to saturate the barrel, right? So right in the first year, we'll lose about 14%. And then every year thereafter, we will lose about 3 to 4% just from evaporation. If we're filling up an ex-bourbon barrel with single malt, you got to keep in mind that wood is already somewhat saturated from having the bourbon in there. And therefore, we will probably only lose 7 to 8% in that first year and 3% thereafter. So it's going to change a lot, but the biggest driver in these changes is going to be which microclimate of the United States are you aging in. If it's hot, if it's humid, if it's dry, those are all going to have a big impact.
Okay, that's smart to use the higher losses barrels, not for the single malt. But actually, I think this should be talked more about because, as you said, I never thought about this, that the aging and the losses can vary so much. And it's not the same for a 20-year-old from a warmer climate and from a colder climate. This should really be brought into the attention of the consumers because it's really not fair to compare those two things.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, what you're looking for is quality. And don't get me wrong, I do find age as it's a really interesting element, right? I like to try something that is old and kind of reminisce. For instance, if I have a 30-year-old Scotch, which I've had once or twice in my life, if I do that, I'll try it and I'll think about all the things that happened while this whiskey was in barrel. Over the last 30 years, man, when this whiskey was put in the barrel, I was only 6 years old.
Yeah.
It's just kind of fun to sit there and reminisce. But as far as flavor development goes, that does not directly correlate to how many trips around the sun a barrel has made, being years. What it does correlate to is esterification, is, acids converting into esters and just developing these mature flavor profile notes, such as like a leathery type flavor profile note. That is going to happen at different frequencies, at different speeds in different regions and locations.
Interesting. Are there any specific aroma profiles that you can only reach with many, many years? Or is the difference not so obvious?
And that's probably a heavily debated one, but I would probably say it's not so obvious because you have to also factor in every distillate is going to be different, right? I mean, the distillate that I'm going to produce versus the distillate you might produce, they're going to be two very different bases that we're starting out from. And so while the region does definitely have an impact on the flavor development, there might be certain flavors that my distillate is just not capable of achieving and that yours is, and vice versa. So it's fairly complicated to say that, there's one note in particular that might develop because I'm not sure that that's going to work across the board at least equally.
I see. So like a very, very professional whiskey taster might not be that comfortable telling the age of the whiskey.
A very, very experienced whiskey mind might be able to taste a product and come up with a decent guess of age. But the reason that I'm saying that is because they can probably also figure out which climate that was matured in. And if you do that, you can kind of work backwards. I don't think that you can determine the age of a whiskey by tasting it without factoring in the region that it probably originated in. So I do think a well-versed mind could probably figure it out, but it's going to come from being able to pinpoint where it was matured and working backwards from there.
That's interesting. That's a big difference between wine and whiskey, because in wine it's pretty easy. You don't even have to be very professional to at least to catch the ballpark of the age of the wine.
Thanks for watching this video. You can watch the full podcast episode by clicking here, or watch another interesting video by clicking here. Let's continue the discussion in the comment section and see you in the next one.